Welcome to the Relief from Grief podcast, hosted by Mrs. Miriam Ribiat and brought to you by Mayrim. Mayrim is an organization dedicated to supporting families who have experienced the loss of a child. It was founded Le'ilui Nishmas Nechama Liba and Miriam Holman. Despite her illness, Miriam devoted herself to addressing the needs of parents and siblings grappling with the immense pain of losing a child. She felt this loss deeply, having experienced it firsthand when her older sister, Nechama Liba, passed away. Mayrim continues to uplift and expand on the work Miriam began, a mission carried forward by her parents with great dedication. If you have any questions or comments for the speaker, or if you'd like to suggest a guest for the podcast, please email us at relieffromgrief@mayrim.org.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Relief from Grief podcast. Today, I am very happy to welcome Mrs. Aliza Bulow to the podcast. She's the founding director of CORE, which is an organization that connects and supports women that serve the klal, such as klal teachers, rebbitzins, and lots of other things, right?
Yeah, Chevra Kadisha members, heads of not-for-profits that serve the Jewish people, classroom teachers, adult educators. We have all kinds of training and support programs for women who serve the klal in many different ways.
It's amazing. I know that you're like growing bigger and bigger and bigger. It's amazing to see what you're doing. Okay, so should we start off a little bit with your story?
Sure. Which story would you like to hear?
Well, I thought about your son a little bit, but if you have other exciting stories.
Well, I would say, let's see, I definitely lost a son. There's no question, about that. But I also lost 2 grandchildren. So there's all kinds of grief that could be there. So it's interesting that it's called Relief from Grief, your podcast. And yeah, maybe it's how you deal with it, or what the relief from the heaviness of it, or that it's part of all of our lives. So I'll share with you.
I that's always interesting to me. Like I appreciate, is the word appreciate, when I speak to people that lost children and grandchildren. Like Barbara Ben Susan came on, and Mrs. Alyssa Felder, she didn't go live yet. Maybe by the time this goes live, she'll be live. But she also lost a child and a grandchild. But so maybe we'll have time to get to that. But I think the point over here is that we really want to talk about suicide deaths and how that impacts the community and how we could try to take away the shame a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I could say I'm experienced in grief, and then there's my son died by suicide. So what does that mean? What does that mean for our family? What does that mean in a community? It's very interesting that 2 years before my son died, and he was 19 years old, and he had mental illness from a very young age. He wanted to die. And it was very weird talking to a 5-year-old who would say to me, at the time that he was 5, we lived in Long Beach, Long Island, near the ocean. And he would say, I just want to walk into the ocean and keep on going.
Wow.
Like, he was very clear from a very young age, like, I don't want to be here. And he couldn't even articulate it. He was too young to articulate his feelings. But as he got older, he was very clear, like, I never asked to come and I don't want to stay. Why should I be here? You made a choice with Abba to have another child, but I didn't make a choice to be your child. I don't want to be here. So I definitely raised a child that I was pretty sure would die by suicide. For me, it wasn't a shock. It was something that hung over the course of raising him.
Can I interrupt you a second? We have to talk about the phrase died by suicide, right? Because I know when I was writing the section in the book of, the book that I'm working on, the suicide section, and that's when I got my lesson that it's died by suicide and not, what did I used to say?
Committed suicide.
Not committed suicide.
Right. So people have worked with the word committed. They don't like the word committed suicide because it sounds like committing a sin or committing a crime. So they don't want to say committed suicide for the person that they love who died by suicide. And right after Donnie died, the language that I was seeing was people would say completed suicide because they wanted to stick with the C. But I didn't like that either because there's suicide attempts, but this person completed suicide. Like, I much prefer the died by suicide. I mean, that does mean suicide literally does mean killing oneself. The side is killing, like homicide or other sides, insecticide or herbicide. Side means kill, whatever you're killing. Insecticide for insects and herbicide for plants, that's for dandelions. So suicide is yourself. Yeah, died by suicide. So why? And I think that's part of the stigma that's around it is, why does somebody die by suicide? Why would somebody take their own life? Like, what's up with that? Is that mental illness? Is that anger? Is that selfishness? Is that like, there's so much about the dying. Is that cowardice? Why do people die by suicide? And we have so much conversation and in our texts, in our sacred texts, in the Gemara, it talks about a boatload of children who were captured from Yerushalayim, captured from Eretz Israel, and then taken. They were in the boat on their way to Rome, and they all looked at each other, all these young teenagers, and they noticed, oh my gosh, we're all good looking. Guess where we're going? We're going into slavery. To be used for our looks and they decided together collectively to jump over the side of the boat and not allow that slavery, which is dying by suicide, right? Which maybe you would say, and this is where there's discussion in the Gemara, was that mutter or not? They knew that they didn't want to be over on Giloi Arayos, so they didn't want to have to be sold as slaves for that. And that's one of the three things that you should die rather than do that Avera. But it was before they did the Avera, before they were confronted with the Avera. Was it mutter to have the understanding that they're headed towards that and kill themselves before they got there? Or should they have done it in the moment when they were first sold and then requested to do whatever terrible thing they would have to do? Anyway, there's all kinds. What is it? And then we have assisted suicide today where people they know they're going to die, and would they rather die with dignity or by choice before they die of the suffering or whatever? There's all kinds of conversations about it. Or you're in the Warsaw Ghetto and you're afraid of what's coming. Did people die by suicide? Look, there's a lot of things are coming out. And was there suicide in the Holocaust? There was certainly more. It seems like there was some significant suicide after the Holocaust, where people made it through all those years and then made it through with hope. And then at the end, when they went home to see their families or to reunite and they saw everybody's dead, that's when some people killed themselves, because they're like, there's no hope. Like, at least in the camps, we had hope that our lives would get back to normal. But now that we see that our house has been burned down or taken over by the neighbors and our family is dead, like now there's no point in hoping. And so there's no point in living. So what is suicide is a whole big question. In my life with my child, it was very clear that there was a mental illness that was deep and abiding and long-term, pervasive, chronic, of not wanting to live and not being able to understand it. My name's Aliza, which means joy. And it actually we have a lot of names for joy in Judaism, from Simcha to Gila to Rina. Aliza refers to a specific spiritual kind of joy. Which is maybe even a resilience, because if you have that spiritual root, then your joy comes from knowing that the direction is good, even when it's challenging, even when it's painful, but like Hashem directs the whole thing. So that leads to an Aliz kind of joy. So, but as somebody whose inner root is joy, I couldn't understand what my son would describe to me. Like, I wake up every morning, I'm like, Modani, thank you, Hashem. I love being alive. I can't wait to start the day. And he would wake up in the morning thinking, really, God, again? You woke me up again. Why don't you just take me? I don't want to have to kill myself, but I don't want to be in this world. So just stop waking me up already. That was his conversation in the morning with Hashem. It's like, forget the Moda Ani, like frustrated Ani.
Like, you know for sure that he told you that he would say that when he woke up?
Yeah. And was really frustrated. He's like, why? Why am I in this world? Why did you bring me here? Why am I here? I don't want to be here. And he didn't want to have to take steps to take himself out, but he for sure didn't want to be here. Desperately did not want to be here.
Wow.
So, right. So in a way, I had the opportunity in terms of the grief part, as the mother who is in conversation regularly with this, I had the opportunity to, in a way, pre-process or rehearse some of the grief that would come. What will it be like? Like, I hope he doesn't do this, and we're going to find the right therapist, and we're going to try the right medications, and we're going to switch schools, and we're going to switch whatever it is, all the different things over the years, whatever we could do to try to help him. And still the worry, like when I go downstairs to wake him up, will he be awake or not? Will he be there? Will he be there? Like, was a constant concern that I lived with. And I didn't even realize how much I lived with it until Shiva, when all the kids were sleeping in the house. Everybody came home for Shiva and the house was full and the night was quiet. It was 2:00 in the morning or so. And I heard a big bump in the night. And I woke up, I heard it, and I went back to sleep. And I was like, I don't have to worry about that big bump because it's not Donnie. That's for sure. Like, I don't have to, whatever that was, some other kid got up, some other kid's making a snack, some other kid went to the bathroom, whatever it is. I don't have to worry about that because my worry is over. And only then did I realize, oh my gosh, every night I was listening. Every night I was worrying. Every night I would follow up on the sounds that I heard because I was worrying. And now I don't have to. Now it's done. Now it's over and I don't have to have that worry. But it was a worry for a long time.
Did that feel relieving or did it make you
It
cry?
was a relief that it wasn't a worry anymore. It was definitely a relief that it wasn't a worry. And what else was interesting about relief in a way, a guilty relief, was I had a few friends with mentally ill children. And we're sort of a sorority of the suffering mothers with mentally ill children. We could understand each other and how difficult it is to have this child who probably isn't going to get married or is embarrassing in the frum community, or the way they dress, the way they talk, the way they smell, the way they eat, the way they whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
All that. I mean, I had one, my son did not smoke, but I had one smoke cigarettes, but I had one that's a friend whose child did smoke cigarettes. And she would wake him up before Shabbos to make sure he could smoke so that he could get through Shabbos without smoking.
Wow.
Like, it's like, but anyway, I felt like I left that sorority of the suffering sisters when Donnie died, because now I was in a different group, the mothers of dead children, rather than the mothers of mentally ill children. So in a way, it's weird to say, but I sort of felt like an older single that got engaged. Like, I left your group. I graduated. I'm not part of you anymore. I'm not in that long-term struggle with you anymore. I'm in a different group now. I'll have my own struggles in this group, but it's a different group. I left you. So yeah, there is that.
Did you lose touch with them, these mothers?
Yeah, I'm not in as much. I mean, I'm still like summer camp friends, like, do you talk to them over the year? No. And when you see them again, can you talk about it? Yes. But it's different because I'm not part of that group anymore. I'm not.
Wow.
I don't have updates on how difficult it is that my child is still not X, Y, or Z, or still is doing X, Y, and Z. So that's not it. I know right where he is. He's safe and sound, waiting for Tchesa Mesim,
What were these other mothers like when he was nifter? Was it from their end, like, I'm a little bit jealous of you, don't have to deal with this anymore? Or did it bring up their own fear and pain? Or was it?
It's such a good question. I don't think anybody would. Very few people, I think, could articulate to themselves that they might be jealous.
Right. That's probably true.
And they certainly wouldn't say it out loud. It's very scary to say that out loud, because you don't ever wish that your child is dead, even if sometimes you might wish that like this part that the threats would end.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I think there probably is some I think there is a jealousy of the relief. There's that. I think there is that, because there is a relief. You're not worried anymore. Like, I don't have to carry it anymore. I don't have to worry on every, trip that I leave the house. Like, will I come back and will he be dead? Will it be now? Should I leave him now? I scheduled a trip, but can I take the trip? Once I took him on a trip with me because it was just a suicide watch on the trip. Like, I can't leave you home. You have to come with me. And he actually came with me to Wisconsin. I was visiting campus Makarvim then. And I just introduced him as, my son's coming with me. He's traveling. He has the time. So here he is. But really it was like, I can't leave him home and I have a trip I have to do. So let's go together and we'll have fun. But like,
oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I did have the advantage of not knowing for sure, but very strongly wondering and worrying if he would die by suicide. So I had the opportunity to pre-process a lot of the grief and the loss. And even though I didn't know, and I was surprised in the moment that like, this is the moment I was waiting for so long. And it definitely feels different than I thought. And I also thought about all the parents who, like, of sick children who say to themselves, or even sometimes out loud, I wish I could take on your pain. And I wish you would be healed. And like, you shouldn't have the pain and I'll take it. And I sort of feel like that happened. Like, I didn't say that to him, but he died and was out of pain and he transferred the pain to us. We now have to walk with that pain. He doesn't have it and we do forever. It's ours. And the whole family split it up a little bit. I have a different pain than my husband has than each of his siblings have. but everybody's carrying a piece of the pain that he was able to shed at his death. And we inherited it in a
And we
different
done
way.
what?
And we inherited it.
Oh, we inherited it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it manifests differently in different ways in each one of us. And over the course of time, it's 11 years already. So it's different now than it was in the beginning. But one of the things that seems to, actually, I think it's resolving a little bit now, finally, at 11 years. But for sure, for the first 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, sleep disturbance is one of the things that parents of deceased children experience regularly. Like just their sleep is ruined. And it's hard to know, is that because I was a grieving mother? Not that I thought about it all day long, but just the sleep was bouncy and difficult and not restful. And like, I was like, I never anyway looked forward to going to sleep because I love waking up and starting my day and getting going. I'm so excited. Sleep is like, oh, you're in the way of like doing stuff. So that was always frustrating. But anyway, being a grieving mother, I have read some things about grieving mothers, and many grief symptoms, quote unquote, clear up in the first 5 years, but apparently sleep disturbance doesn't. That's something that lasts.
5 years isn't so long. People could...
No, it's not.
Right.
But I'm saying, for, let's say, here's a word that I learned for grief is grief bursts, like cloud bursts. Like you could be going along in your life and all of a sudden there's a grief burst, like that you see something, you smell something, you taste something, you hear something, you're like, and the tears start to flow. That's a grief burst, right? And it could happen because you heard a song or whatever it is. And so there's grief bursts. Those are much less intense and are much, much, much further and farther between as the years pass. So I would say that's what they were talking about in a way as symptoms clearing up. Like, in the initial stages of grief, like in the initial, like everything, all that I felt like, not that I had experienced this ever, but I've read about it. I felt like I had a hangover, sort of like going to the supermarket. It was too loud and too bright and people moved too fast, and like going down the aisles and thinking, oh, I should buy tuna fish because we're almost out because no, I don't need tuna fish because he doesn't need tuna fish anymore. Oh, I should buy him a Snapple. Oh, we don't need Snapples anymore. Like that was hard, but also like there were too many people there. Like it was just too much, or like
some of them even were smiling or laughing.
I know, like it was just, and how could they just go on with their lives? So there was that. So there was like a sensory overload for the first several months. Like every time going out was sensory overload. That resolved. And then like, learning the laughter and enjoying life and not feeling guilty about it. So that also resolves. But the sleep really stuck for a long time.
Wow.
It really did. It really did.
So let's talk about, I'll tell you what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, number one, like the stigma of it. I know that, when after he was Nifter and your Rav wanted to, told you he'll help you keep it a secret. So I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about, like, when we spoke a while back, you gave me just such a clear, like, understanding of how suicide today is really almost always mental illness. You told me about the girl from Africa. So I found that very interesting. So I guess if we could, talk about those 2 points.
Okay, great. So first of all, we do have a stigma in the frum community. And if you look at the Maurice Lamb book on death and dying, not on death and dying, Jewish laws of death and mourning, the chapter in there on suicide is very sad for the parent of a suicide death. Because it really talks about the halachas of suicide and their burial. They're not buried with tachrichem or with a matzeva or with kalmalei rachamim or they don't have a yard site. They're not, they're buried. They're not, none of that is afforded to them. And yet in the chapter, it does say, but you should treat their family with compassion. There's no shiva even. You should treat their family with compassion. Okay, that's not the case today. The halachic reality today is different. And that's for Rabbanim to discuss, and I'm not here as in that, but I will just say that the halachic reality is different today, and everybody should ask their own child. But in general, of course, we still treat the family with compassion. And in general, suicide deaths, people who die by suicide are still buried with everything. They get a tahara, tachrichem, everything, a matzeva, a yard site, kalmalei rachamim, the whole shebang, and a shiva, full shiva. Why? Because we do have a different view in general of why people die by suicide. Our understanding of the mechanism of death or that causes death is different. And we do understand that not in every case, but in many cases, and most of the cases that we experience today, certainly in this country at this time, that it is mental illness that causes that death. Because if in this country at this time, again, distinguished from other parts of history where we're not subject to slavery, where we're not subject to that kind of kidnapping, where even illness can be made more bearable by pain medications and things like that, where we have enough food, people are not starving around us, we have enough clothing, we have homes, basically we're safe and secure, well fed and everything. Who wants to die in those circumstances? Only somebody where it's really broken inside them. And that's where my mushal came, my made up story, which is a true story. It could have been a true story. Stories are true because they could have been, they should have been, or they actually were. And so here's a could be true story. But it is a true story of, let's just say there's that 16-year-old girl in Africa who's living in a village when the militia comes in and kidnaps her 10-year-old brother and makes him into a soldier, given a gun and made into a soldier. And her parents are killed in front of her. And her younger siblings are burned in the hut along with her parents' bodies, right? Where she hears the children screaming as she runs. She's been captured, but escapes because she knows she'll be raped, and she runs for her life. And she's running and running and running and running from that village with nothing behind her because her parents are dead and her younger brother is taken and her siblings are killed. And she has no place to go and nothing with her. And she's running barefoot through the briars and brambles because she wants to live. Because she wants to live. She doesn't know how she's going to do it. She doesn't know how she's going to make it happen. But she knows that she wants to live. The drive for life is so strong that it impels her to run for her life. And her life is terrible in that moment. She'll hopefully make something good of it. Maybe she's going to grow up and be another Ayan Hirsi Ali, who learns and is strong and can change the world. But meanwhile, she just wants to live. So if the drive for life, and there is that girl in Africa right now, as we speak, she exists. If her drive for life is so strong in those circumstances, somebody from our families, safe, secure, loved, fed, cared for, educated, if they want to die, it's only because something is so broken inside them, so broken, that we see that as a fatal illness. It's fatal. It killed them. And just like we don't blame a pancreas for not working and somebody dying of diabetes, or we don't blame an immune system for not being able to conquer the cancer, even though we gave it our best shot with all the chemotherapy or surgery that we have at our avail. But when somebody still dies of cancer, it's not their fault, right? They still get to be buried properly. So the same thing with suicide deaths today. We do our very best with all the mental health interventions that we can muster and all the medications that we can find and all the school shifts that we can find and all the love and care and support, therapy, etc., that we could figure out. But if they die because something's so broken inside them that we can't fix, it's not their fault. So not that anybody should do that. And anybody who's hearing this, who's feeling suicidal, should definitely reach out for help. And anybody knows anybody who feels suicidal should be willing to talk to the person about it, because I think there are avoidable suicides. There are humps that people could get over. And there are also chronic illnesses that they can't. But even with a chronic illness, you can lengthen the life, right? I mean, I think about that with Robin Williams. People say, oh, he lost the battle. I'm like, oh my gosh, look how many battles he won.
I don't know who Robin Williams is.
Robin Williams is a famous, beloved comedian in American society. Famous, did so many roles. He played Aladdin he played the genie in Aladdin, in the Disney Aladdin. It might be one role you've seen him in, but he played a lot of things all across the board. But he struggled with depression his whole life. And in the end, he died by suicide, and people were devastated because he was a very, very beloved comedian. And in general American society, it really was a hard blow for a lot of fans. And everybody felt like, oh, he lost. And I'm like, well, look what he won. He won decades. He won decades of his life. He made it for decades. He fought valiantly and won decades more of life. He could have died in his 20s. He died in his 60s.
Oh, wow.
So
if a parent is listening to this, a parent that lost a child by suicide, what could you tell them that they shouldn't feel guilty that, oh, maybe it was just a hump and they could have done more for their child?
You can't. So first of all, a parent who's listening to this, I hope, is a parent that believes in Hashem. And God, for those of you who are listening who don't understand the Hebrew. So here's a therapeutic riddle for you. What's the difference between a Jew and God? God knows everything. And a Jew knows better, right?
Okay.
Or we really think we do. Like, we're pretty convinced we do, which is why we tell God we have so many answers for God. We have so much advice for God in our prayers. We're constantly telling God what he should do, right? On behalf of the world to make it work right for our kids, for our spouses, for our schools, for our communities. Like, we have a lot of advice for God. If we actually remember that Hashem does know better than us, then we could trust Hashem to have matched that soul with that body. I mean, he matches our own souls with our own bodies. That's the first shidduch that Hashem makes, is our soul with our body. And it's a perfect match. Our soul needs the body that we have with all of its strengths and imperfections in order for our soul to have its best journey, because everybody only has a journey. We're all going to die in the end. There's always a beginning and an end. In the middle is how do we use our body and the environment that we're in to achieve the best soul growth while we're here. That's the whole thing, right? So we have to trust that for ourselves. We have to trust that for our child too. Hashem put that body and that soul together and then put that combination of body and soul into our family to be that sibling of those kids and my child. I was the right parent for them. My spouse is the right parent for them. They're the right child for me. This was the right environment. We had the right tools at our avail. We didn't have all the money to hire all the things. We had the money we needed for this child at this time. We didn't have all the therapists available. We had the therapists that were supposed to be the ones that were for this child at this time. I mean, just think about somebody who in the 1960s, when they get breast cancer, it was a death sentence. We didn't even say the word cancer in the 60s, right? It was
still don't. I mean, I do, but a lot of
right.
people
A lot of people still don't. Why? Because they're so scared of it. It's going to kill you. So don't even say the word. Don't give it any energy by even mentioning the name. Whereas today, it's not a death sentence. You find out you have cancer, you're like, okay, so what do I have to do now? I might need surgery. Oh, I might need medicine. Oh, my hair might fall out, so I have to buy a new wig. Okay, okay. Like, that's not pleasant. It's not. But you're not thinking you're going to die. You're thinking, I'm going to have a hard time for a couple of years, right? So, but that's only today. In the 1960s, if they died from that, you don't look back and say, they should have been born in the 80s. They would have lived. No, that's not the hashgacha. They were born in the 60s for a reason. They were supposed to die that way. And there's going to be new things that help. Like right now, there's deep brain stimulation that's going on to help medication-resistant depressions. But that wasn't available for Doni at the time. I contacted some people who were in charge of some of those clinical trials, and I was told it's not for people who are actively suicidal. I'm like, really? Because why? Try it. If he's going to die from that, like better than this, like really. But I had to remind myself afterwards, as that was advanced after his death, that like it wasn't the hashgacha that he should have that availability. It wasn't designed for him. He was born at the time he was born and died at the time that he died. And that was the hashgacha. He had the right parents and the right money and the right therapists, even if they were difficult therapists who said the wrong things and did stupid things. But they were the right ones for him because Hashem brought them together. He made the shidduchim and he knows the right path. And our family is supposed to go through this and he designed it. So it really is a biyado of kiruchi is one of my like big mantras. Like just rest in Hashem's hands. It's the end of Adon Olam for anybody who's not recognizing those words. But really you just rest in Hashem's hands. Biyado of kiruchi. I'm going to place myself in Hashem's hands. Be'etishan v'ayira, when I'm awake and when I'm asleep. Ve'imruchi gaviyati, not just my soul in Hashem's hands, actually my physical body too. Everything about me in Hashem's hands. And with Hashem, I don't have to be scared of anything. Adoshem li velo ira.
Sorry.
That Adoshem li velo ira. I don't have to be scared of a thing. And I don't have to have the recriminations either. You know, I mean, it's hard. And that is part of the sleep disturbance right after that kind of a death is like you're thinking, oh, maybe I should have this, and maybe I should have that, maybe I should have this, and maybe I should have that. And I read a lot of books in that time that made me wonder, oh, if I would have known this, oh, if I would have understood that sign, oh, if I would have done this, like, but I didn't know that then.
Right.
And that was the hashgacha too.
Right.
You know, and just to really trust that Hashem gives you what you need. Yes, you should try to stretch yourself. Yes, you should try to learn. But Can you fix the whole world? You can't. Can you fix your own child? Actually, you can't. You can't. All you can do is your very best with the tools you have in the time that you have. And then you have to release it. There's no point. I mean, for me, I feel like there's no point in letting that take over my life. I have the rest of my life to live. It's a piece that I live with. It's a growth. It was a whole growth workshop for the 19 years that I had him. And that got more intense at different times. And having lost him also is part of my ongoing growth workshop, and creates new connections and new insights and new challenges and all along the way. And that's the hashgacha too. Hashem set me up for what he wants me to do in this world. And that was part of it. And all I can do is say, Hashem, you gave this to me. Please help me live with it. Please help me do the best that I can with whatever you gave me. So that's what I would say to parents who are feeling so guilty is feel it and then release it. Feel it first. Just say, I feel really guilty that I didn't mortgage my house to send my child to that treatment program. But then we'd be on the street and we'd still have a dead child. So I'm actually thankful I still have my house, for my other kids.
Something less, like I feel guilty that I gave him the car. I should have known that he's going to drive into the ocean or whatever.
Right. But you didn't know.
Right.
But you didn't know. So then you can work with it. Like I should have known. Well, you didn't know. So then you can say, switch it to, I'm so sad that I didn't know.
Right.
Right. Instead of I should have. Because if you should have, you would have. Right. Because Hashem's in charge of that. If you should have, you would have. Right. That's tragically called Tzarki. Hashem gives me everything that I need. He also makes every need that I have. It's the other way to read those same exact words. I wouldn't have a need if Hashem didn't give me the need, but also he gives me everything that I need. So if you shoulda, you woulda. But you could just feel sad. I wish I would have known. I wouldn't have given the car. But then what? Who knows? But I did. And he made his choices. I can't be responsible for his choices. I can only be responsible for mine. And so now here I am after my child is dead. Let me be responsible for my choices now. How will I treat my family? How will I treat myself? How will I build my relationship back with Hashem? Maybe if I have a little pause in that relationship, because that's very common to have I don't feel like talking to you much, Hashem, kind of period in your life.
Right.
And that's okay. It's okay to have a little pause in communication and recognize it as a pause. Just say, look, I don't really want to talk to you right now. Give me a very hard time. And I need to digest this a little bit before we have our next conversation.
And just saying, I don't want to talk to you right now shows you still have that connection.
Yeah,
so
it does. It does.
So how much after Doni was nifter did your grandchildren died how far apart?
So I had a granddaughter, a twin baby, 2-week-old twin baby girl who died 6 months before Doni died.
Oh, wow.
And then actually she died in November, Doni died in May, and then my father-in-law died in October, Erev Sukkot. So my husband lost 3 generations in 1 year.
Wow. Should I ask him how he managed, or should I ask him how
he had a hard time managing? He's still in his pause with Hashem. But she didn't pause at the time. He really paused it, I would say, after our grandson died 3 years later. So, and that was a year-long battle with migrating partial seizures of infancy, which is a terrible seizure disorder that just basically spontaneous start, drug resistant. Even though they could give him morphine to make him more comfortable, they couldn't stop the seizures, and they just basically had to wait until his brain seized out. A terrible way to die. Take a whole year to just have seizure after seizure after seizure until your body can't stand it anymore and it just expires. So my daughter went through that valiantly, daughter and son-in-law. And my husband kept with the updates and the doctors and the everything. But at the end, he was like, really? Like, it's one thing to take our son who lived and had a hard life and a good life also. But it's another thing to take our daughter's son who only had a hard life. He never had a good day. And that was very hard on my husband. Very hard.
But wouldn't people say, people would say, like, he only had a hard life. Now he doesn't have a hard life anymore. Right? Like, find the comfort that he's not suffering anymore.
Oh, yeah. Except for then, but if you're going to go that way, I'll just say the darker side is, really, God, you would bring a child into this world just to torture him every day for a whole year? What was that about?
Is it harder to see your grandchild in pain or to see your child in pain over the pain of their child?
Right. It's very hard to see your child in pain. I mean, I think it was harder to watch her in that pain than to watch Donnie in his pain. So the child that we lost and the pain that he suffered with, he did suffer. But to watch our daughter suffer with losing that child was a different kind of pain. Yeah. Yeah, it was a very different kind of pain. And it was interesting she had a 5-year-old and an almost 4-year-old at the time, 5-year-old and a 3.5-year-old when he died. So the 5-year-old was there with me.
How old was the baby when he ended up dying?
The baby was 1 year old exactly.
Wow.
When he died. And then she had a 5 and a 3.5 above him. So when the Chevra Kadisha came to the house to take away the baby, so I took the 5-year-old, the 3.5-year-old wasn't there, but the 5-year-old was in the room. So I just said, come with me into the basement. Like, we'll sit on a chair. I didn't want her to see them like pick him up out of his crib and take him away.
Yeah. Ooh.
So I held her on my lap and we just talked, what's happening upstairs and why are they doing it and what's going to be next and what's that going to be like. Makes me tear up a little bit just to think about it. But she said, I'm really mad at Hashem.
At 5?
At 5. She said that. She said, I'm really mad at Hashem.
Wow.
That he died. I said, talk to your grandfather about that. He is too.
So did they?
I don't know if they talked about that, and they might still. But I'll tell you this. I think this is something to think about in terms of whether it's relief from grief or the continuing pathway from grief. But here's a thought that I had. So that same granddaughter, last year, she was 12, or maybe just almost 12, when her other grandfather died of cancer. And she wasn't sure, does she want to go to the funeral or not go to the funeral? She's like old enough that she could, but young enough that she's not sure if she, what should she do? So she ended up coming to the cemetery. And then when she saw the open grave before the Aron got there, she was like, I don't know if I want to do this. So she went and sat in the car. But I talked to her because it was a little while in that space. And I talked to her about the river of grief, which is something I made up. But I like the idea. So I said, there's a river of grief that runs through your life. It starts when you're born. When you disconnect from Shemaim and you're born into this world, there's a sense of loss and you cry when you come into the world. Oh my gosh, I have to be in this world, but I was in the zone of Kedusha and Tahara. And I have to come into this world of like physicality. How hard is that? I'm grieving the loss of that. And I said, and then there's a river of grief that's sometime in the background and sometimes in the foreground of your life, but it's always there. So when you lost your baby brother, you were swimming in the river of grief. Remember, we sat there in that chair and we talked about it a little bit. You were taking a swim in the river of grief. And then when your friend loses their grandparent, so you're not grieving then, but you might be sitting on the edge of your river of grief and just dangling your toes in, feeling their sorrow, but it touches your river. And right now you're on the edge of your river of grief with this loss of your grandfather, and you're not quite sure how to process it. It wasn't the closest relationship, but it touches your river of grief. That's what's happening for you. That's why you're having these mixed feelings. It's like, what do I do? Do I sit on the edge? Do I take a swim? Do I wade in? Like, where should I be in this river of grief? And how is it touching me? Do I want to stand there? Do I want to stand here? But it's what you're feeling is the angst of coming into relationship with your river of grief, which will be there for you always in your life. It never goes away. You just come closer or further from it. Sometimes you forget that it's running in the background. And sometimes you come in very strong relationship with it. Like when you lose somebody you really love. Sometimes even a pet, can bring you to your river of grief in a different way. So I like the idea that I came up with just to talk to her about that. We all have our river of grief. And sometimes somebody else's loss brings us to a place where we could consider a loss that we hadn't considered before. Something that, like, let's say a 5-year-old loses a grandparent. So they didn't really have a loving connection with them yet, maybe. They were a distant grandparent. But at 15, when their friend loses a grandparent, that's when they realize, oh my gosh, not only did I lose a grandparent, but I didn't have them for the last 10 years. Look, my friend who's 15 got to go on trips with their grandparent. I lost that.
Right.
And so I have to revisit that. Like I lost that potential. I didn't understand it at 5, but I understand it now at 15, right? So or whatever it is that, and you feel it again when you're 65 and you realize, I don't really know how to be a grandparent like that because I lost mine when I was 5. So I lost the example. So that's part of the river of grief. And we revisit it at different times in different ways throughout our life when we understand different pieces of losses that we're dealing with. And it's all part of that river of grief that courses through our life that everyone has.
Wow.
So you can't leave it behind, but you can come into different relationships with it over time.
So do you and your 2 daughters, do you like connect that you each lost a child, or each loss was so different?
Yeah, each loss was very different, but we do connect. I mean, I lit a candle for Donnie for 19 years and 3 months. So I still do Friday nights, he's part of my candle lighting. And then both of them had to figure out, should they, shouldn't they? Do they keep lighting a candle for that child?
You mean regular, like by lichtbenching?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't
Yeah.
they?
Right. So why wouldn't they? So why wouldn't they for a 1-year-old is one thing. Why wouldn't they for a 2-week-old is another thing.
Right.
How much mothership do you get to own over a stillbirth or over a child who's born sick and will likely die, but you hope won't, but then does? Do you get to claim them as your child or not? Do other people say yes? Oh, but they were only 2 weeks. Yeah, but they were only 2 weeks, but there were 9 months of hope, but there were actually 4 years of dreams and then 9 months of hope and then 2 weeks of life. Like, how much do you get to own that? So I think that is its own journey also in coming into relationship with how much are you the mother of that child, and then how much do you want to say that out loud when people come to your house and see your candles and say, why do you light 6 candles when you only have 3 children, right? Or whatever it is. So then you have to explain it again.
I just have to say that, again, this topic is one that I researched a lot. Like, okay, having a stillborn is very painful and very huge. And Malky, Kirstenfeld Knafayim it's very real. But still, the difference is from the people that I spoke to, from having a stillborn, even if it's in your 9th month, to a baby that lived 3 seconds is worlds apart.
Yeah.
Like once the baby let out that cry or took oxygen in, it was a real living thing, even if it lived for 5 seconds. And that's why when you're talking about a 2-week-old, I'm like, 2 weeks is 2 weeks.
2 weeks is 2 weeks, and 2 weeks is a lot. One of the things that was helpful for me in understanding the purpose of a 2-week life of illness or the purpose of a 1-year life of suffering is I see them as chesed pullers. They pull chesed from others. That could be their purpose. If olam chesed yibaneh, if this world is built on chesed and we need chesed in a way as the fuel to keep the world going. So some people's job is to create opportunities for chesed, to be that darling little baby that needs chesed, or the baby in the family where the family needs the chesed, needs the meals, needs the rides, needs the love, needs the hugs, needs the tzedakah, whatever it is, that they could be somebody who brings chesed into the world through their needs. So I feel like both of those babies were chesed pullers, and they pulled chesed out of so many people, really in remarkable ways. Who knows, were they born to suffer? I don't think so. Did they need to suffer in order to do what they needed to do in this world? Clearly they did.
Right.
So, but that is where I do trust Hashem, to know that he knows the exact cheshbon. He's not torturing somebody's stomach.
No.
He knew the exact cheshbon for why that child had to come in, what they had to experience, what the parents had to experience, what the grandparents had to experience, and what the friends of the parents had to experience, each one in its outer rings. Some with just a sigh, oh my gosh, did you hear the so-and-so's had a baby that's sick? Oh, that's so sad. Even that tiny bit of suffering, that's the whole comment. And that's all the suffering that person got in their life, 3 friendship rings away from the center. Okay, they were supposed to experience that little bit, whatever it was. So it's not for nothing. Whatever Hashem does, it's all calculated carefully. And for me, I trust in that very deeply. And that makes the whole thing not have to always make sense, because it always does make sense, if you know what I mean.
How often do you have to rework that trust, or it's so strong that it never diminishes?
I would say that I've worked it so many times, like I worked it so many times during Donnie's life that it really stood there very clearly for me at Donnie's death. And then I worked it many more times, as Donnie, like in those first few months of really just dealing with I trust you, Hashem, but this is so hard. I regularly would say, look, just to remind myself, not that I didn't believe it, but just I would say, like, Hashem, Hashem, kel rachum v'chanun. And I would just stop there. Like, it's the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, but I just say those first four, like, rachum v'chanun, rachum v'chanun. You're so rachum v'chanun. Like, I have to put all this into the package of rachum v'chanun. I don't know, like, that's your definition, Hashem, is that you're rachum v'chanun. And somehow this experience fits into that. I trust that. And so I just said it a lot, just like walking down the street, like Rachum v'chanun. Hashem is Rachum v'chanun. So that was part of it was part of a walking meditation of reminding myself and readjusting and realigning on a regular basis. And then I regularly, one of the things I did was like when I would feel like Donnie's neshama heavy or the grief heavy on me, is just like see his neshama kind of like a little dove in my hands. And I would like just hold it and then like a dove, cast it up to Hashem and just say, here, Hashem, please catch Donnie's neshama. Like that's what you wanted, but like take his neshama and love it. Like it's by you now, not by me. You entrusted his neshama into my care for those 19 years. And then really for the first 13 years. And then he's in charge after that, but still he was under my roof. Like I had 19 years of caring for this neshama. And now it's your job, Hashem. Like my job is over and your job isn't. Fortunately, you could do a lot of jobs all at the same time.
I like the visual of the dove. I always imagine, I don't know, like a box or balloons or something like that, but it doesn't have to be only the neshama. It could be like my pain, right? Here, just take pain from me. I'm in too much pain today or whatever it is.
Right. Just to cast it up, like let it fly up, cast it up and give it back to Hashem. Yeah. So I did that a lot. And I think all that strengthened it. That's the answer to that question. Like it was strong before, but it's like definitely woven tighter into the fabric of my personality and spiritual clarity through all those exercises.
Right. Life, makes you always, I don't know, how do you say, weave it into the fabric. Yeah. It can be so tight, but you constantly have to be weaving it more and tighter and a different color and a different direction and a different, I don't know what.
Right. So let's just go back to the secret thing for a second, because the stigma, we want to talk about that, like the stigma in our community. So I think if we keep it secret, first of all, that keeps us separate from our community. It will perpetuate our own parental sense of shame, because you keep secrets because of the shame. But then it also, not only does it perpetuate your own sense of shame, but also then keeps you in a bubble distant from your community, because you can't be honest. You have to actually lie to keep it a secret, right? Oh, it was a car accident. Oh, it was a heart thing. Oh, it was a whatever thing, right? So you're lying. Who knows how that works with the midvar sheker tirchak thing that we also have, but let's just separate that. But the point that I want to get to is you can't have emotional intimacy with lies. Lies prevent intimacy. So if you want to have frientimacy, even intimate friendships, or even just clean social discourse with community members, if a lie is mixed into that, or if you can't be seen for who you actually are, then you can never feel valued for who you are. If you're projecting something that's not you, or projecting a death story that's not your family's death story, so then people only are accepting your story and not you, because you've never let them see you or what happened. I advocate for honesty here, even though it's really difficult, and even though people might look askance. But I feel like if we can stand strong in our vulnerability and say, I did the best I could. And even if right away you feel like I did the best I could, but I failed, or I'm not even sure if I did the best I could, and I'm so sad that my child is dead. But if you can stand in that sorrow, and even in that sense of failure, and let your community members hopefully embrace you in that, even though people will say stupid things like whatever it is, like you have more kids, or there's all kinds of stupid things that people can say. But still, on the other side of all of that, in a year or two, the honesty creates honest relationships, which helps you feel actually properly supported, and then also leads to others being able to be honest and be properly supported before and after a death. So what if somebody just has a mentally ill child who's not headed towards death, hopefully, but is mentally ill? if there could be the honesty of like, I am struggling with this. It's so hard. Like if somebody had cancer, I thought about that, struggling with Donnie and his mental illness. If my kid would have cancer and had to go to the hospital, people would make meals for us and ask how he's doing and daven for him. But not with a mentally ill child. They just look at you and say, what kind of a parent are you that you let your child be like that? You know, there's all this judgment. So much judgment. Why is he dressed like that? Why does he do that? All that judgment. I mean, I remember once going to a bar mitzvah of a Down syndrome child. I have a grandson with Down syndrome, but this was before he was old enough to be bar mitzvah. And this child was able to have a bar mitzvah, and he made a bracha that you for his aliyah that you could only understand if you understood how he spoke. It was not like somebody else hearing a recording of that wouldn't know what he said.
Right. Okay.
But there was a news station there and so many guests there, and it was videoed and shared, and everybody was so proud of him that he made it to that day. And I was thinking, when my mentally ill child makes it to bar mitzvah and makes a bracha, everybody's going to say, why didn't he make a siyum? Nobody's going to say, wow, that's amazing. You kept him alive to this day.
Wow.
And he was able to make a bracha.
Wow.
That's amazing. Nobody's going to film it. Nobody's going to broadcast it. Nobody's going to congratulate me. They're just going to say, where's his siyum? How come you didn't do that too? Or at least that's how I felt.
Right. Right.
So that if we could be more honest, and I wasn't sharing at that time, and most people can't, but still the point is at this point, more mature, more tried and more mature, I can advocate for that honesty because I think that will strengthen our community and help us carry those who are really carrying something so hard that we could be the neighbor who at least gives a hug or says, how's your son doing? You know, and when somebody can't say Baruch Hashem, they could say Gamzu Latova. I can't say Baruch Hashem on how he's doing, but I could say Gamzu Latova. I know Hashem is only doing what's good in the world, whatever that is. I trust him on that.
So I think that for someone listening to this, I think one of the things that I would want a parent to take away is to not be ashamed of it, to be able to really open up about it and to not take the blame for it. Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think that's really important. Is that there's not blame, just like there's not blame with diabetes or asthma. You know, okay, with asthma, so if you say, why do you have a cat when your child is asthmatic? So then you might say, get rid of the cat. Your child's having asthma problems all the time.
right.
So, but you do your best. What are you doing with your mentally ill child? So, okay, get rid of the difficult teacher or the school situation that's not working, right? Or whatever it is. Okay, you do your best, but you can only do what you can do. And then there's no blame after that. There's not. There's just compassion. And I think that's one of the things we have to remember all the time. It's like Hashem, we're created in the image of God, created in the image of Hashem. And Hashem is Rachum V'Chanun. When we talk about the Yud Gimel Midos of, it's never Yud Gimel Midos of Kaas. It's never of anger. It's never 13 attributes of anger, 13 attributes of condescension, 13 attributes of whatever it is. It's 13 attributes of Rachamim. That's how we know Hashem. 13 different flavors of Rachamim. And we're supposed to live that in this world. 13 different ways of
And what if a parent would say to you 13 different ways of Rachamim, and Hashem couldn't find in those 13 attributes enough Rachamim that my child should be okay? I must be a really bad person.
Right. So that's where you have to understand that Hashem knows. That's where that therapeutic joke comes in.
Right.
Because that's where you're second guessing Hashem. That's the point of that joke. It's the point of it. And that's why it's therapeutic. That's where you can ask the person just privately, what's the difference between Hashem and a Jew? Hashem knows everything, and a Jew knows better. Right. Hashem does know better. Hashem is kulo rachamim. Rachamim. Somehow this fits into that, but I don't know how yet.
Right.
And maybe I won't know while I'm still alive. But in the end, we say in Shir Amalos and Shabbos, Az Yimales Chok Pinu. Then in those days, our mouths will be filled with laughter because we're gonna get it at some point, but not now. If we don't see it now, all we can do is trust that Hashem actually has it stronger than we think. And sometimes I feel like you might look at Hashem and say, I don't know what you're thinking, Hashem, but I know you are thinking. I know you are.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Anything like that we forgot to say that's important before we end?
I would say this. Okay. One more important piece. Like if you are dealing with a child who's mentally ill or suicidal, or have this like heavy thing that you're carrying, There's no blame for you, but there's also no blame for your spouse. And I think that's really important to know, that like turn towards each other. To be a team in carrying it is so important. Even if you carry it in different ways, you don't have to both do the same things or think the same things, but at least to be on a team before, during, and after. Like just make the choice to turn towards each other again and again and again, and be a team in handling it. So important that your marriage shouldn't break up over this, because it's very trying, very, very trying. And you can make a proactive choice. We will grow through this as we go through this, but we'll make the choice to grow through this and grow our marriage, even during the hard times. Like, we're going to stick together and be a team. So that's what I would want a parent to also take away. Develop your team.
Does a spouse develop that team if the other spouse doesn't agree with anything that the spouse is saying?
They might need to be in denial or have some distance. Like in our case, it was easier for me to have all those conversations with Donnie, and my husband wasn't able to. It was too hard for him. But it didn't mean that he disagreed with having them. It did mean sometimes we didn't talk about all the things because it was too much for one to handle or the other. Okay, so I took on a different role than he took on. But I think that's part of it, is to respect the other's needs and capacity and gifts in the whole thing. And sometimes you fill in, sometimes, like, let's just say, I mean, everybody could, even though it's not always, but most often the wife that cleans the kitchen, Motzei Shabbos or whatever. But if she has the flu, he's not going to just let the kitchen look like that till Wednesday when she feels better and can get out of bed. He'll clean the kitchen, or he'll get the teenage daughters to help, or the teenage sons to help, or figure out a way so the kitchen doesn't look like that for days and days, right? You pitch in when the other one can't. And you just have to know, it's with kitchen work, it's with homework, it's with income, it's with whatever it is. It's with rides for kids. It's with handling the challenges in life. You pitch in how you can and a little beyond how you can when the other one can't, because we're a team. So you just want to develop your team sense and pitch in as much as you can.
Okay. Well,
okay.
So much. And it should be for Aliyah for Donnie's Neshama.
Amen.
You've just listened to an episode of the Relief from Grief podcast with Miriam Riviere, brought to you by Mayrim. For more episodes, visit the Mayrim website at www.mayrim.org. Help us reach more people who might benefit from this podcast. If you know someone who could find it helpful, please share it with them. If you have questions or comments for the speaker, or if you'd like to suggest a guest for the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at relieffromgrief@mayrim.org. We look forward to having you join us in the next episode.
Wait, don't go yet. I just want to say that I really, really appreciate the feedback that I've been getting in whatever form you give me feedback, whether it's an email or, calling me on the phone or telling me when you meet me. I really, really appreciate it. But there's a new thing now that's right under the podcast. There's a link. I think it says something like, we appreciate your feedback. You could click on it. A box opens up. Okay. I know I'm talking really fast, right? A box opens up and you can write in it whatever feedback you have. It comes to only me. It's private. Nobody sees it unless you sign your name. I don't even know who it comes from. So I just wanted to put it out there. It's very easy to leave me any feedback that you may have. I just want to, before we end, I want to read this one email that I got about the Mrs. Vairi Crime and podcast. If you didn't listen to it, you may want to, because it was very, very powerful. Listener writes, thank you so much. After hearing her experiences, it made me focus more on my blessings rather than on my challenges. And I'm just adding in that I think that was the sentiment of many of people that listened to her. Thank you.